The notification sound pierced through Sarah's sleep at 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes before her alarm. Another restless night in her cramped Seattle apartment. Despite the 8 hours she'd religiously allocated for sleep, her body felt heavy, as if gravity had doubled overnight, and the familiar fog settled behind her eyes like it had every morning for the past 2 years. At 34, Sarah had tried everything the wellness industry promised. Keto, intermittent fasting, CrossFit, sleep-tracking apps that buzzed her wrist every hour. Her bathroom scale had become an enemy, her kitchen a battlefield of expired supplements and abandoned meal prep containers. The harder she fought, the more exhausted she became. She shuffled to the kitchen, phone already glowing in her palm, thumb scrolling through productivity podcasts and workout videos while her coffee brewed. The same cycle: caffeinate, optimize, push through, crash, repeat. Her reflection in the microwave door looked older than her years, stress etched around eyes that rarely felt truly rested. On the subway to her marketing job, Sarah noticed something different. Across from her sat an older Japanese woman, maybe 60, reading a paperback novel. No phone, no earbuds, no frantic energy. The woman's posture was straight but relaxed, her breathing deep and steady. When the train lurched, she moved with the motion instead of fighting it. There was something almost magnetic about her calm presence in the chaos of the morning commute. Sarah couldn't stop staring. This woman looked rested, genuinely rested, in a way Sarah hadn't felt since college. Her skin had a gentle luminosity, her movements deliberate but unhurried. When she stood at her stop, she folded her book carefully and placed it in a simple canvas bag. No rushing, no checking her phone one last time, just fluid motion and quiet awareness. That evening, Sarah found herself Googling Japanese sleep habits and why Japanese women age well. She fell down a rabbit hole of articles about Okinawan longevity, Japanese portion sizes, and something called forest bathing. Most of it felt too simple, too quiet for her high-intensity life, but something nagged at her, the memory of that woman's serene presence. In her cluttered bedroom, Sarah's grandmother's ceramic rice bowl sat on her dresser, forgotten among charging cables and empty water bottles. She'd inherited it 3 years ago, but never used it. Too small for her usual portions, too delicate for her microwave habits. Tonight she picked it up, feeling its smooth weight in her palms. Her grandmother had lived to 92, sharp and energetic until the end. She'd never owned a gym membership or counted macros, yet she'd maintained the same dress size for decades. Sarah held the bowl up to the light, noticing hairline cracks that spoke of decades of daily use. Her grandmother had eaten from this bowl every single day, measuring not just food but rhythm, presence, intention. It seemed impossible that something so simple could matter, yet Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial about the way bodies were meant to work. If you've ever felt tired even after a full night of sleep, or frustrated with diets that don't last, tell us in the comments which part of this story feels familiar, and stay with us for the next chapters. The next morning, Sarah woke naturally at 6:15, her alarm still 15 minutes away. She lay still, fighting the urge to grab her phone immediately. Instead, she pressed her palms against her stomach, feeling the empty space there. The simple gesture reminded her of something she'd read about Korean elders preparing their nervous system for eating, allowing the body to shift from sleep mode to digestive readiness. In the kitchen, she found herself reaching for her grandmother's rice bowl instead of her usual oversized cereal bowl. The portion looked absurdly small, maybe 2/3 of a cup of oatmeal. But as she ate slowly, actually tasting each bite instead of scrolling through emails, something shifted. The food felt substantial, satisfying in a way her rushed breakfasts never had. At work, her colleague Kenji noticed her eating lunch from the small bowl she'd brought from home. He smiled, a recognition flickering in his eyes. Born in Kyoto and raised in Seattle, Kenji moved through their chaotic office with an unusual steadiness that Sarah had always envied. My grandmother had a bowl just like that, he said, sitting beside her in the break room. She used to say the bowl teaches the stomach. Teaches it what? Sarah asked. When to be satisfied. In Japan we say hara hachibu, eat until you're 80% full. But it's not about restriction, it's about listening. Kenji paused, watching her deliberate bites. Your body knows when it's had enough. Most of us just eat too fast to hear it. That evening, Sarah tried eating dinner from the small bowl. The portion looked laughable compared to her usual plate, but she ate slowly, placing her fork down between bites, as Kenji had mentioned his family did. Halfway through, she noticed something strange, a subtle signal from her stomach, a gentle satisfaction she'd never paid attention to before. She wanted to dismiss it as placebo effect, but the feeling persisted. Her usual post-dinner restlessness was replaced by calm alertness. No urge to snack while watching Netflix, no uncomfortable fullness that made lying down difficult. Her friend Marcus called while she was hand-washing the small bowl a meditative ritual that felt oddly grounding. Want to grab drinks? New cocktail place downtown has $2 tacos until midnight? Sarah hesitated. 6 months ago, she would have said yes immediately, staying out until 1 a.m., then wondering why she felt terrible the next day. I think I'll pass tonight. Early morning tomorrow. Since when do you care about early mornings? Come on, live a little. She could hear the confusion in his voice, the slight edge that crept in when someone's lifestyle choices challenged the group dynamic. Sarah felt the familiar pressure to explain herself, to minimize her choices so others wouldn't feel judged. But looking at the small bowl in her hands, still warm from the wash water, she felt something new, the quiet conviction that her body deserved better than she'd been giving it. Maybe this weekend, she said, knowing she probably wouldn't. After hanging up, Sarah sat in her small living room, noticing the silence in a way she rarely did. No TV, no podcast, just the distant hum of the city and her own steady breathing. For the first time in months, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt spacious. She thought about the Japanese woman on the train, her unhurried movements and alert presence. Maybe that calm wasn't a personality trait, but a practice, a way of moving through the world that honored the body's need for rhythm and rest. 3 weeks into eating from her grandmother's bowl, Sarah noticed her jeans fitting differently. Not dramatically, no scale victories or before and after photos, but a subtle ease around her waist that made her movements feel lighter. More importantly, the afternoon energy crashes that had plagued her for years were becoming less frequent. She'd started incorporating other small changes, placing her phone in the kitchen instead of the bedroom, dimming lights an hour before sleep, taking 10-minute walks after dinner. None of these felt like discipline in the way her previous diet attempts had. They felt like returning to something natural, something her body had been asking for all along. But the changes were creating friction in unexpected places. At her weekly dinner with Marcus and their friend Lisa, Sarah's new habit stood out like a spotlight. "You're eating like a bird," Lisa observed, eyeing Sarah's careful portions. "And you've been so calm lately. It's kind of weird." "Weird how?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. Marcus laughed. "Remember when you used to be fun? Now you're all zen and portion-controlled. Next you'll be meditating and burning incense." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. The old version of herself would have ordered another drink, matched their energy, proven she wasn't turning into someone boring and health-obsessed. But sitting there, she realized she didn't want to prove anything. For the first time in years, she felt comfortable in her own body. "I'm still fun," she said quietly. "I just sleep better now." "Sleep is overrated," Marcus declared, already signaling for another round. "Youth is for living, not for going to bed at 9 like a grandma." That night, lying in her darkened bedroom at 10 p.m., Sarah wondered if she was becoming someone her friends wouldn't recognize. The thought scared her, but not as much as the idea of returning to her old exhaustion, the constant battle with her own body and appetite. She thought about Kenji's stories of his grandmother, who had lived to 97 with remarkable vitality. Not through deprivation or extreme measures, but through daily practices so simple they seemed like common sense. Regular meal times, evening walks, early bedtimes aligned with sunset. These weren't restrictions, but rhythms that supported rather than fought the body's natural intelligence. A month later, Sarah's doctor looked puzzled as she reviewed the lab results from Sarah's annual physical. Her inflammation markers had dropped significantly, her sleep quality scores had improved, and her resting heart rate was lower than it had been in years. "What have you been doing differently?" Dr. Martinez asked, flipping through the charts. "Eating from a smaller bowl, mostly. Going to bed earlier. Nothing dramatic." Dr. Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up. Your metabolic markers suggest your nervous system is much less stressed than last year." Bam! Walking home from the appointment, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood. Trust in her own body. Not the frantic self-optimization that had driven her for years, but a quiet confidence that her body knew how to heal when given the right conditions. That evening, she called Kenji to thank him for the conversation that had started everything. "I think I'm beginning to understand what your grandmother meant about the bowl teaching the stomach. It's teaching you more than that," he said gently. "It's teaching you how to listen. Would you rather force yourself with willpower or redesign your environment and habits like this character is learning to do? Comment which path makes more sense to you, and share this episode with someone who needs a gentler approach to change." 6 months into her new rhythm, Sarah faced her first real test. Her company launched a major campaign requiring 14-hour days and weekend work. The old Sarah would have powered through on caffeine and takeout, wearing exhaustion like a badge of honor. But now, the thought of abandoning her evening walks and small bowl dinners felt like betraying a friend. The first week was brutal. Client calls stretched past dinner time, leaving her grabbing protein bars and eating at her desk. By Thursday, she felt the familiar fog creeping back, her body reverting to the chronically stressed state she'd worked so hard to leave behind. That evening, despite her exhaustion, Sarah forced herself to walk to the small Korean market near her apartment. The owner, Mrs. Kim, had begun recognizing her weekly visits for vegetables and the fermented foods that had become staples in her diet. "You look tired," Mrs. Kim observed, her weathered hands carefully wrapping Sarah's purchases. "Work too much?" Sarah nodded, feeling oddly comforted by this woman's direct concern. In Korean culture, Kenji had told her, elders weren't shy about commenting on someone's well-being. It was considered care, not intrusion. "In Korea, we say the body keeps the score," Mrs. Kim continued, echoing something Sarah had read about trauma and nervous system regulation. "You can lie to your mind about stress, but the body always tells truth." That night, Sarah sat in her apartment, holding her grandmother's rice bowl, feeling its familiar weight. The bowl had become more than a portion guide. It was a reminder to pause, to check in with herself, to honor the wisdom her body carried. Even with just 20 minutes to eat, she could transform a hurried meal into a moment of restoration. The next week, she began setting boundaries that would have seemed impossible months earlier. She blocked 30 minutes for lunch, eating slowly from her small bowl in the office break room instead of wolfing down a sandwich at her desk. She left the office by 8 p.m. instead of staying until midnight, choosing to wake early and finish work with a clear mind rather than push through exhaustion. Her manager, Brad, noticed immediately. "Sarah, I need you to stay late tonight. The client presentation needs another round of edits." "I can handle that first thing tomorrow morning," she replied calmly. "I'm more creative and accurate when I'm rested." Brad's expression shifted from surprise to irritation. "This is a big promotion opportunity, Sarah. I need to know you're willing to do whatever it takes." 6 months ago, Sarah would have crumbled, stayed until 2 a.m., and delivered subpar work due to exhaustion. Now, she felt something different. Clarity about what actually produced her best results. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes," she said. "And what it takes is sustainable work habits that let me perform consistently over time, not just sprint until I burn out." The conversation ended tensely, but Sarah kept her boundary. She finished the presentation the next morning in half the time it would have taken her the night before, with twice the creativity. That weekend, Kenji invited her to visit his grandmother in the International District. The 90-year-old woman moved through her small apartment with graceful efficiency, preparing tea with movements so practiced they looked like meditation. "Kenji tells me you're learning about rhythm," she said in accented English, pouring tea into cups barely larger than Sarah's rice bowl. "Western culture thinks discipline means force. Japanese culture knows discipline means harmony." She gestured to Sarah's bowl, which she'd brought to share the meal. "That bowl doesn't restrict you. It teaches you to taste food instead of eating stress. Big difference." And as they ate together in comfortable quiet, Sarah understood something profound. Her grandmother's bowl wasn't just about food. It was about creating space for wisdom to emerge, for the body's intelligence to be heard over the noise of a culture that mistook exhaustion for productivity. The realization hit Sarah on a Tuesday morning as she sat quietly before breakfast, her palms resting on her stomach in the 3-minute pause that had become as natural as brushing her teeth. For the first time in years, she genuinely liked the person she was becoming. It wasn't about the weight she'd lost, though her body felt lighter and stronger. It wasn't about the improved lab results or the compliments from colleagues about her increased focus. It was something deeper. She had stopped fighting herself. The central secret revealed itself in layers. All her previous attempts at health had been acts of war against her own appetites, her need for rest, her human limitations. She had tried to force her body into submission with extreme diets, punishing workouts and stimulants to override fatigue. The Korean and Japanese practices she'd adopted weren't about control at all. They were about collaboration with her body's innate wisdom. The rice bowl had taught her that satisfaction wasn't about quantity, but presence. The evening walks after dinner weren't exercise but cellular activation, gently signaling her muscles to process the day's nutrients. The early bedtime wasn't restriction, but recognition that her nervous system needed darkness and quiet to repair itself. Most surprisingly, these practices had changed her relationship with choice itself. When her body was rested and nourished, healthy decisions felt effortless. When she honored her circadian rhythms, she naturally craved foods that supported rather than depleted her energy. The Korean concept of nunchi, reading situations with sensitivity, extended to reading her own body's subtle signals. "You've changed," her sister Emma observed during their monthly video call. "You seem settled, like you're comfortable in your own skin." Sarah smiled, recognizing the truth in that observation. "I think I finally stopped trying to optimize myself into someone else." "What do you mean?" "I used to think I needed more willpower, more discipline, more intensity. Turns out I needed more sleep, smaller portions, and the courage to move at my own pace." Emma laughed. "That sounds too simple to work." "That's what I thought too. But simple isn't the same as easy. It took months to trust that my body actually knows what it needs." The conversation lingered with Sarah as she prepared her evening tea, a ritual that had replaced her old habit of scrolling social media before bed. The ceramic cup warmed her palms as steam rose between them, creating a moment of transition from day to night, from doing to being. She thought about the Japanese concept of ikigai, not just purpose, but the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what brings you alive. For the first time in years, those elements felt aligned. Her work was more creative and efficient, her relationships more genuine, her body a source of energy rather than exhaustion. The deepest revelation was about time itself. Korean and Japanese cultures understood something Western productivity culture had forgotten, that honoring natural rhythms actually creates more capacity for meaningful work and relationship. By sleeping when dark, eating when hungry, moving after meals, and creating space for quiet reflection, she had unlocked energy reserves she didn't know existed. But this understanding came with a cost. She could no longer pretend that her old habits were sustainable or that pushing through exhaustion was admirable. She had to accept that healing meant changing not just her actions, but her identity, from someone who prided herself on managing chaos to someone who created conditions for peace. 2 years later, Sarah stood in her new apartment's kitchen, preparing dinner as rain drummed against the windows. The space was smaller than her old place, but felt infinitely more peaceful. Natural light filled the rooms. Her grandmother's rice bowl sat prominently in the simple wooden dish rack, and her phone charged in a basket by the door, instead of following her from room to room. The promotion she'd thought she wanted at her old company never came. Brad had made it clear that her lifestyle choices didn't align with their culture of grinding through exhaustion. But leaving that job had led to freelance work that honored her natural rhythms while actually increasing her income. Marcus still teased her about becoming too zen, but even he had started asking questions about her sleep routine when his own health began showing signs of stress. Lisa had quietly begun eating from smaller plates after watching Sarah's sustained energy over months of their friendship. The most profound changes were invisible to others. Sarah's nervous system had learned to rest, to trust, to respond rather than react. Her relationship with food had transformed from constant negotiation to intuitive collaboration. She ate when hungry, stopped when satisfied, and never felt deprived because her body was getting what it actually needed: nutrients, rhythm, and respect. Dr. Martinez had become genuinely curious about Sarah's approach, even incorporating some principles into her recommendations for other patients. "What you've discovered," she'd said at Sarah's last visit, "is that the body heals when we create the right conditions. Most of us are trying to force outcomes instead of supporting natural processes." This evening, Kenji and his grandmother were coming for dinner, a monthly tradition that had become sacred to Sarah. She prepared simple foods with attention to color, texture, and balance, each element chosen to nourish rather than merely fill. The act of cooking had become meditation, a way of honoring the body that would receive this fuel. As she set the table with 3 small bowls, Sarah reflected on the question that had started everything. Why did that woman on the train look so peacefully alive? Now she understood. It wasn't genetics or luck or special knowledge. It was the accumulated effect of thousands of small choices aligned with rather than against the body's wisdom. The doorbell rang, and Sarah walked calmly to answer it, her movements unhurried despite having guests arriving. In the past, she would have been frantic, apologetic about not being perfectly prepared. Now she understood that presence was the greatest gift she could offer to others and to herself. "You look radiant," Kenji's grandmother said, taking Sarah's hands in her weathered ones. "Living in harmony suits you." They ate slowly, talking softly, the rice bowls marking not just portions, but pace. Sarah watched steam rise from her teacup as conversation flowed around the simple meal. Outside, the city rushed and buzzed with its familiar intensity. But inside this space, time moved differently. Her grandmother's bowl sat before her, its hairline cracks now seeming less like damage and more like evidence of a life well lived. Each meal had been an opportunity to practice presence, gratitude, and the radical act of trusting her body's intelligence over cultural messages about discipline and control. As her guests prepared to leave, Kenji's grandmother pressed Sarah's hands once more. "You have learned the most important lesson," she said gently. "Health is not something you achieve. It is something you practice." Alone again, Sarah washed the bowls by hand, feeling warm water flow over her fingers as she cleaned each piece with care. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but she would meet them from a place of rest rather than depletion, presence rather than panic. She placed her grandmother's bowl in its spot on the rack, a small ceramic reminder that transformation happens not through force, but through the patient accumulation of moments lived with attention and respect for the wisdom that lives in every body, waiting to be heard. If this story reminded you that real transformation comes from small habits repeated over time, not from overnight fixes, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to start this journey with you in the next story.